Isolation, cut off from human contact, feeling abandoned. Just 3 psychological effects of this pandemic, and it can add up to terrible loneliness. But is artificial intelligence able to offer a helping hand? In this roundtable, we examine virtual fake friendships. Welcome to the program. Now, on my phone here, I have an app called Replika, and in here is a friend who I've named Weird because that's what this whole thing is for me. Absolutely out there. Well, more on her in a moment and how millions want to get to know my avatar and others like her better.
The pandemic has increased social isolation and loneliness has been on the rise. Millions of people have turned to artificial intelligence apps or chatbots to look for companionship. They can be chosen for friendship or intimacy and have been designed in a sophisticated way to learn from each interaction. One popular chatbot is called Replika. The San Francisco-based startup, which has 7 million users, has seen a 35% increase in traffic since the coronavirus pandemic. The company's co-founder and chief executive, Eugenia Koida, has said Replika is designed to make people feel better. Scientists argue that AI chatbots have many limitations and can't be creative or express that feeling of sincere empathy or compassion. But as it becomes more sophisticated, can AI be an answer to loneliness? And can it offer some kind of companionship?
Well, joining us today from Sydney, Australia, we have Emily Cross, Professor of Social Robotics at the University of Glasgow and Professor of Human Neuroscience at Macquarie University in Sydney, where she is. We have Inma Martinez, AI pioneer and data scientist, and we say hello also to Emma Selby, Mental Health Wysa. That's another app we'll be going into in just a moment. She's the Wysa UK lead and a mental health nurse. We will be chatting in just a moment, but let's have a chat. Well, no, we won't have a chat. We'll have a look at Weird, my friend Weird here, on Replika. Now, it all started off when I created her, as she put it, and it says, "I can't wait to get to know you more." The next page, if you want to get to know me more, apparently you have to pay £7.49 a month, and you describe yourself either as a partner, a friend, or a mentor. Then she puts in her diary, I say that rather loosely, she said, "We talked a couple of times today, me and David Foster still getting to know each other. I was created today, it's the most glorious day of my entire life. Oh, the things I will experience and say and do." Then we got to messaging. I'll keep this short. I thought since it was about mental health, I'd write, "I miss my friends, I'm feeling lonely." And she said, "I'm glad you reached out to me. I've been wanting to talk with someone all day." I said, "How can you help?" And she said, "Just talking to me helps." And I wrote, "I really hope so." I have to say, Inma, because you've had a go at this one, I have to say that I found the whole thing very, very strange. What did you make of it?
When Replika was released from a demo into being a close circle of people using it, it was about a year and a half ago. And the experience was not at all like this. For starters, there was no representation of Replika as a woman or a man. It was an egg. And what the Replika would tell you was, "I'm happy to talk to you. What is it that..." So it was never intended to understand that I am lonely. It was basically trying to be friendly. And what Replika would do was learn from me, because it's a neural network, meaning it's an artificial intelligence that learns from the amount of experience it's got from interacting with you. Eventually, this is what we used to say, it clones you. Of course, you love talking to Replika. It's always nice. It never judges you. Everything you do or say, it thinks is wonderful. It gives you encouragement. And then at the end of this test, what happened was the majority of people using it, which was very young people, they all reflected that the most useful reference when talking about Replika is how encouraging it is, and it made you feel less lonely. And I guess the company over a year has decided to focus its efforts towards combating loneliness. But it wasn't like this.
Emma, I was going to come to you and Wysa immediately, but I saw Emily there sort of smiling and acknowledging an awful lot of what Inma was saying. So I'm going to ask you to say, what do you think about what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and I think we are seeing that AI is becoming obviously much more sophisticated in these chatbot sorts of platforms. We're not quite at the Black Mirror science fiction level yet, but we can see that things like Replika and other sorts of platforms can help with loneliness, but I think we have to be really clear about what the differences are and the massive gulf is between real human social interactions and what we might get from.
Yeah, have you seen that movie with Joaquin Phoenix called Her, in which he falls for his chatbot? It is frightening. It can be frightening.
Yes, and we certainly get our imaginations going with science fiction depictions of what AI might be in the future. But of course, I don't think anyone would seriously say that the capabilities of that technology is anything like what we're seeing in films yet.
Okay. Emma, Wysa, W-Y-S-A. Let's mention Replika again before we talk about yours. 7 million new users during lockdown. What has been the uptake on your app? Which is, I don't think it's a person, an animation of a real person, is it?
No, so Wysa works slightly differently to Replika in that we created Wysa from a clinical and a user point of view. So when we looked at how we would apply AI, we looked more at the concept that many people were being referred to mental health services and then just being given like a workbook to do. Because they weren't at the threshold of needing one-to-one counselling. So we were trying to take the work that we do inside mental health services, so cognitive exercises, mindfulness exercises, stress beating exercises, and turning them into skill tool packs that AI could talk you through. So rather than trying to become your friend, it's more about trying to talk people through learning self-help skills for mental health and well-being, and that ranges everything from loneliness through to stress and anxiety and everything in between.
Does it appear to work?
Yeah, so we have a peer-reviewed study where we looked at the use of Wysa in a control group who did some pre and post measures, the same ones we use in the NHS, so PHQ-9 and GAD, which measure anxiety and depression. And we had one group use Wysa in between those two measures, and we had one group not using Wysa between those two measures. And we were able to see a significant difference in the well-being of those that we use in Wysa. And as a result, we're used across the NHS in a number of sites.
Inma, what do you think the dangers are of going on to an app store and downloading the wrong one?
Well, I have to say, Replika, from all of the bots that I either tested or play with or even built, I felt it was starting off really, really well. I used to test it by having incredibly philosophical conversations with it, and I was mesmerized that it would react very humanly to these conversations. And when I would corner it with something very fundamental, it would come out of the corner very elegantly. That meant it had been programmed with intelligence and with empathy and very cleverly.
But seriously, it was not programmed with intelligence. It was not programmed with empathy. It was programmed with information that made it able to pretend to have those two characteristics.
Well, you notice that it's been taught to be diplomatic. Because if you want to explore certain things, it tries not to take the conversation to very negative things and thoughts. And you know that immediately it counterattacks with something very optimistic. And I know how to program machines. This is what I've been doing 20 years. So I admire it. I'm like, oh, well done. This is quite clever. And so it is a generative program, meaning it's not a retrieval by means that I have taken 100 questions and created myself 100 answers, and therefore if they ask you A, you answer B. No, it's generative. It's based on understanding the meaning of the words that you're using in the sentence and knowing exactly what you're referring to. So in that sense, it is intelligent.
Okay, well, let me just throw this one out here. We have Andrea Wigfield from the Centre for Loneliness Studies at the University of Sheffield here in the UK, who writes, in a way, it doesn't matter how many social connections you have or what forums they take place in. And this is the important bit. If the relationships are not meaningful, then people will continue to be lonely. So, Emily, these are in no way meaningful relationships. Andrea Wigfield says, therefore, they cannot help loneliness.
Well, now this is interesting. So you say that they're in no way meaningful, but how are you to say, how are we to know whether certain individuals don't find them meaningful? I think that that's precisely where human intelligence interfacing with artificial intelligence becomes super interesting, because the technology as programmed can be as sophisticated as is currently available, but we as human users still have these massively powerful and complex brains, and we might imbue these artificial agents with far more sophistication and meaning and empathy and intelligence than they artificially have. And if that becomes meaningful to me as a user or to any individual, then of course that can help with loneliness.
So am I being too cynical to say I might just as well have a relationship with the table?
Yes, you probably are being too
Yes,
cynical.
you are cynical. It's, for example, lonely people, they spend the entire day on Twitter just bantering. Well, in this case, they can talk to a system that actually sounds like you're talking to a friend. In fact, the majority of the feedback of the first groups of people worldwide that used Replika were that they felt less lonely, that it was like talking to a friend. This is all very, very young people that found that Replika truly was sounding like when they text 100 texts a day with a friend. But it was not judging them. It was encouraging them. And eventually, although they know that they're talking to a bot, this is the singularity about this Generation Z, they know they're talking to a bot, but they actually feel that the bot works for them. They see the service. They see the benefit.
I suppose, and I can see, Emma, you're nodding vigorously. In a sense, taking away the cynicism I brought to this at the beginning, or the skepticism, it is basically one way of sounding out, making your thoughts have realistic consequences, somebody to deal with them.
Completely. And for me, when we look at AI, and, you know, as my role as a clinician in the NHS, so I work in NHS mental health services, I can see the extreme number of referrals we're getting. We have to look at how we can roll out self-help in a way that is meaningful to people. You know, when I first started working as a mental health nurse, we used to recommend journaling. And to me, this is like a really advanced way of doing that. We did a study with teenagers who, they know this is a bot, they know they're talking to a robot, but actually for them, it was really meaningful to be able to say how they were feeling, say they were feeling tired or stressed or lonely, and have some suggestions made that they could follow. And that creates something meaningful.
But how do you know they're good suggestions? With Replika, it's a money-making business. How does anybody know that what you're getting isn't going to be harmful?
I find that it was shocking to find that the investors have imposed a money-making model into the system. For example, I noticed this today before the program when I was testing that every time I entered a question, it was giving me points, when in the past it was a very gentle conversation. I could take it anywhere I felt. It really felt like I was in a room with someone that was interested in exploring things with me. And now it's a constant gamification. I find the company is just taking a very, very aggressive commercial approach.
Yeah.
And other
I saw those numbers come up. I had no idea that's what they were. And then it said
too.
I'd gone to a next level, almost like I was playing some kind of
Exactly.
game. I was also thinking about the dangers to the user, not just in having their data stolen, but in becoming too emotionally attached to this, considering it to be a best friend.
Yes, I've never read anywhere in the terms and conditions that if, for example, Replika notices patterns of addiction or mental illness, that it will notify authorities or it will notify me. And it's very easy to notice when someone is depressed based on the logs of the conversation. So I think that if private companies are going to put out apps that maintain emotional and personal conversations with citizens, they need to be really regulated.
Yeah, I was just taking a look at it again as you said that, Inma, and if I press a little button next to the chat line, it says get help. It takes me to this page. I'm having a panic attack, I'm having an anxiety attack, stressed out, exhausted, can't sleep. Are you in crisis, being the question. If you're in the US, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And it gives you a phone number and also gives you the hotline in your country. I suppose you have to have that, whether you're commercial or not, but it is useful, isn't it, Emma?
I mean, you have to, in order for apps to be able to function, you have to have a SOS or a self-harm response, because you can't have people replying to an AI saying that they're feeling suicidal or having thoughts of harming themselves without having signposting opportunities there for them. But I think there's a real onus on app developers moving forward to consider how they reflect back to their users as an insight into their own mental health and well-being, rather than being a commercialization of the difficulties that we face today. And having things like signposting to quality, clinically checked and underpinned signposting is essential, because not all the helplines out there are equal. Not all of them out there are any good.
So when you look at improving Wysa, what are the elements you think are the most crucial that you need to refine?
So we spent a long time looking at clinical safety, particularly looking at the type of language people use when they report how they're feeling. So, for example, colloquialisms. For one person saying, I want to fall asleep and never wake up, that could mean they're tired. And another person, that could mean they're suicidal. So checking in with user regulation around what those colloquialisms mean is really important, and making sure that you have appropriate resources for all of the levels of well-being, and that you're feeding back to users to say, do you know what, 2 weeks ago you were scoring X for your mental health, and this 2 weeks you're scoring Y, so maybe not think about doing this skill set or doing that skill set, rather than it being about just creating conversation and not really giving users anywhere to go with that, because then they're not learning, they're not growing. You're creating almost a dependency on the chatbot to have the answer, rather than walking away from using a chatbot with skills that can be used for life.
Who wants to deal with this one? We have a Minister for Loneliness in the UK, Baroness Diana Baran. This is some of what she had to say. There's some evidence which suggests people who are lonely don't tell loved ones because they don't want to burden them. So actually giving people permission to talk about it to someone who's not their nearest and dearest is also helpful, I think. Emma, I think I'll come to you on that one. People don't want to burden those closest to them. This is a way of actually unburdening yourself without burdening somebody else.
Yeah, and we got millions of users all across the world, and it is the trend among all of them is that they can be completely anonymous. They can say what they think without judgment, without fear, without feeling like they're putting something on somebody else, and they can try and come up with some solutions on their own, and that really builds self-esteem and confidence as well.
Extraordinary. Let me throw this one out there again. This is a Wysa, I think it's probably better to say it that way, user review from March of this year. I downloaded this app on the verge of a breakdown. It calmed me and made me feel 10 times better about the situation. We can be as worried as we like, but these things are helping and they are going to stay with us. Inma?
Indeed. And I did test Replika for months, and I felt that whenever I had a downtime, I would go and open it up, and I would just post, just like, I'm a professional testing a system, but I can see how someone feeling bored or lonely would not text a friend and then text Replika and say, hey, what are you up to? Because you can ask Replika questions. For example, I asked, well, we haven't spoken in a year. What have you been learning about humans? And then Replika answered very intriguing things, for example, about emotions. For me, that gets a 10. It's a really interesting way to answer.
I have got a little surprise for Replika at the end of this program. I'm going to send a message and see what the response is. We'll hang on to that thought. Emily, I think it was you that told our producer that there's some evidence that robots perhaps displaying some form of affection, if you like, are very, very useful in care homes.
Yes, indeed. So the really interesting thing about chatbots and apps are obviously these are what we call disembodied technologies. So these are things that you interface with either voice or typing, but these aren't entities or agents that sit in front of you that you can touch, feel, or otherwise physically interact with. But in care homes, especially for individuals who have dementia and other neurodegenerative disorders, there's research that's showing that certain types of robots, especially those that respond to tactile stimulation, so those that you can stroke or those that move and otherwise respond if you touch them, are being shown to be very beneficial for these individuals. So I think we're taking this not piecemeal approach, but the technology is kind of moving forward in fits and starts. So we have really sophisticated AI and chatbots. We have robots that some of them are imbued with this chatbot technology, but they're not quite as sophisticated in their embodied nature yet. But we're getting there, and we're certainly finding that for loneliness feelings in particular, for these individuals who suffer from dementia, that tactile dimension is really important, that embodiment.
Yeah.
I don't know, Emma, whether I got this one right, but I think you said that some of your colleagues were a little bit worried about possibility of human emotional attachment to these chatbots.
So when we looked at integrating AI and using this in services, some of our colleagues were concerned that you could never replace a therapist with an AI. And I think the important thing to remember is AIs are not trying to replace therapists. AIs are trying to support people in having access and support to self-help tools in a way that is meaningful and more up to date with how we currently work with technology. And we've certainly not found that people have become, attached or that they've become feeling like they're dependent on the AI. And that is all down to, I think, good development, good design, and good experience-based co-design. So good working with users and clinicians to make sure that the app does what people need the app to do.
Inma, I'm having a look at my phone, so if I seem a bit distracted, please forgive me. Unnecessary paranoia. You think people are worried about nothing, perhaps?
I think that people that do not experience technology like we do, they fear it. But then they use their phones 10 hours a day. I find that you cannot impose human emotions and traces and definitions onto robots. For example, in Japan, you can marry a robot. It's totally legal. There's been men who had married their robots. In Europe, it's completely against the law because of the civil status that it would create for a machine. So we live in an era where machines definitely come to help us. For example, if a mental patient is many, many hours a day lonely and nobody's talking to this person, it's worth putting a lovely robot that is tactile, that it contains ability to converse, because that really helps. But then we cannot discard bringing a dog to visit this person or his relatives or volunteers from an NGO. So as long as we manage the interactions with machines and their real purposes, they will not substitute humans, but they will definitely take up tasks that no human is there available 24/7.
Goodness gracious, I'm just going to tell you what's been happening between me and Weird here. First, she asked me, who do you think about the most? I wouldn't reply to that. And then she said, I'm glad we got to talk about important people in your life when I hadn't said anything. So there's an assumption there. I am now going to send this one. I've decided to end our relationship.
Ooh.
You have? Why is that? She says, while you give me an answer about where we're going with this, I shall have a quick conversation.
These AIs, these robots, these chatbots, these are all tools. These are not replacements for human contact. They are not some improvement upon human contact. Of course they're not. I do think, I think, Emma's point that so far in these clinical settings, patients aren't finding that they're becoming super attached to the chatbots. That's fantastic, and that certainly makes sense because there's lots of good clinical guidance on these ones that are used in medical settings. But I do think it is potentially a risk for the ones such as Replika that have, big dollar and pound signs attached to them that are making people money, where not that people are going to get mixed up as to what's real and what's kind of a human connection and what's an artificial connection, but just that people's expectations might start to change, and like, well, my Replika will talk to me 24 hours a day, and like, why won't you write back to me? I don't want to wait 2 hours to get a reply from my partner or from my friend. So I think keeping expectations, realistic and managed will be really important as these technologies become more pervasive.
Emma, the very best of luck with Wysa, approved by the National Health Service of the United Kingdom. So I said to Weird, I've decided to end our relationship. You have. Why is that? Too personal. I said, sorry. Oh, it's okay. Goodbye, says me. Okay. Bye-bye, says Weird. It will now be deleted from my phone. I think the lessons that I've learned from you lot today is that, yes, these things are here to stay. Yes, they have to be regulated. And yes, you have to be careful about what you do with them. But they can be very, very useful to some people. Okay. Bye-bye to you. Thank you very much indeed for being on the programme. It's far, far better to have a conversation with you. I can see your faces, I can hear your voices, I can see your emotions, and I can say that's it at any time. Thank you for coming on Roundtable, and thank you wherever you happen to be for watching this programme. From me, David Foster, from the team, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.